Hello everybody, it's jrobi. I wanted to do a video today on some recent chess controversy that took place near the end of February. And it was at the Aeroflot Open in Moscow, Russia, and a grandmaster by the name of Mamedyarov accused a fellow grandmaster, Igor Kurnosov, of cheating. And it was quite a controversial event that took place, and it's been being blogged about on a number of chess sites for the last few weeks. And there's been letters put out from both parties about what actually went down. Now, I'm going to preface things by saying that the way that this was handled during the tournament was very unprofessional, and basically what had happened is Igor Kurnosov had been getting up from the table to go outside for a cigarette here and there, also to just kind of wander around in between moves. And this is quite common in chess tournaments. Like his opponent at the time, Mamedyarov, took 40 minutes for one move to think through it. So you're not going to sit there and wait for your opponent for that long. So it's quite common in chess tournaments actually for people to get up after they've moved and move around and do things. But what had happened is he made this allegation of cheating in a very unprofessional way. They were at the board. He stood up, didn't even shake Kurnosov's hand after resigning, didn't even say a word, went straight to the arbiter and lodged his complaint. Now, the arbiter at the time checked the contents of Kurnosov's jacket and found a pen, a piece of paper, and some cigarettes. So there was absolutely no evidence found whatsoever that Kurnosov had been cheating. What's even more interesting is that the game itself was only 21 moves long. So what we're going to do is we're going to take a look first at the letter that Mamedyarov wrote in response to his own accusation and why he lodged that in the way that he did. And he wrote that shortly after leaving the tournament. He dropped out of the tournament completely after this happened, by the way. But then we're also going to look at some of the annotated comments that were placed by Kurnosov in the game. He published an annotated version of the game shortly thereafter, and talked a little bit about why he made the moves that he did, because one of the allegations was that a lot of his moves, or most of his moves, were like the most preferred move that the computer could see. But that doesn't really hold a lot of water, especially so early on in the game, because computers aren't magical chess players. They play chess based off of their opening books, based off of their programming, and all of that programming has come from games that have been played in the past, computer games that are being played now, and the development that goes behind them. So a computer isn't like a mystical magic chess warrior that pulls the best moves out of a straw hat. Instead, it's quite often relying upon positions and moves that have been played in that particular position before. And I know that's not the greatest explanation of how computers generate their chess moves, but they're not. I guess the one thing that I'm trying to say is that they're not the end-all be-all to winning at chess. Granted, they are stronger than any human player out there today, but being able to play a move that the computer thinks is a good move isn't that uncommon, especially a grandmaster level player. I remember when I was watching Chorus earlier on in the year, people like Carlson and Nigel Short were making moves that the computer thought were the best moves as well, very deep into the game. So it's definitely not uncommon for grandmaster level play to play moves that engines like Ribka 3 thinks is a strong move. Now, they're not always dead on the money, but when the position is a logical position in terms of, a move just looks natural and right, chances are the computer is also going to see that move looks fine. But before we get too deep into that, let's get started here. I'm going to read the letter that Mamedyarov wrote, and it starts out with on the 22nd of February 2009, the game between myself and Igor Kurnosov was played. During the game, my opponent went out of the playing hall after each move, took his coat, and withdrew himself on the toilet. After suspicion of unfair play on move 14, I offered a draw. He refused. We quickly played 11 moves. On the 12th move, I played a move which confused my opponent. The next moves for him were given as first choice by Ribka, which quickly allowed him to win the game. Due to the series of suspicions having to do with the unusual behavior of my opponent, Igor Kurnosov, I hereby lodge a protest and refuse to continue participation in the tournament. I hope that this kind of situation will not occur in the future. And Mamedyarov signed that letter, and this was that letter took place after the game happened, and then not too long after, Kurnosov replied. But what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the game now and the positions that arose, and we'll take a look at Kurnosov's own replies to why he played certain moves, and then we'll leave it at that. I'll say my opinion, and you guys are more than welcome to share yours, and I'm very interested to see what side of the fence you land on this issue, not only because it's interesting, but I think it's also important to talk about it as well. So let's get started here. Mamedyarov's playing white, and Kurnosov is playing black, and white opens up with d4. Black responds knight to f6, and white plays pawn to c4. So standard book move stuff here. g6 is played, getting ready to fianchetto that dark square bishop. And from here, white now plays f3. Now I'm going to go back for a moment. f3 is actually not the most played move in this position by any stretch of the imagination. And in fact, in terms of database results, it tends to favor black slightly. That being said, it's still very much an equal position. But much more common in this position would be to play, say, for example, knight to f3, or knight to c3, or even pawn to g3, getting ready to fianchetto the light square bishop from white. But in this particular position, white opted for pawn to f3. From here, black now plays pawn to d5. White takes, black recaptures, and white now pushes up the pawn, gaining control of the center with pawn to e4. Black retreats the knight now, and white plays knight up to c3. Black plays bishop to g7, getting that bishop along that nice dark square diagonal. And white plays now bishop to e3, placing that bishop on more of an active square, developing it and getting it supporting the pawn here on d4. From here, black castles. White plays queen to d2. Knight to c6 is played by black, followed by a queenside castle from white, and then f5 was played in this position. Play continues now, pawn to h4, and black takes the pawn on e4, and white pushes the pawn up to h5. Now this is all pretty much standard book stuff here. The g-pawn takes on h5, and from here the best move for white in this position is just to take that pawn with the rook. But instead of doing that, white plays pawn to d5. Now I'm going to back up a move here for a second, because even Kurnosov made a little note in his personal annotation of the game, and he says that it's a well-known theoretical position which he considers to be better for black. And then he goes on to say that here my opponent played a move which is new to me. Now the move that was new to him was pawn to d5. And I found that this was a very interesting part in the game, because pawn to d5 has definitely been played before by white in this position, but in terms of database results, the scores tend to favor black in the long run. So, you know, I think that this is the first major crucial move from white that is illustrating quite clearly that white is selecting some moves that are definitely not in white's best interest. So in other words, white had the much more powerful rook takes on h5, which definitely leads to a very workable position from white. In fact, in terms of engine analysis, white is almost a half a point ahead in terms of positional strength by taking on h5. Now, engine analysis in the opening isn't very reliable, but at least you know that white is not doing anything fundamentally wrong. d5 itself isn't fundamentally wrong as well, because d5 has a dead-on equal score with Ribka 3, but it's more riskier when you look at the database history on the move. More people have lost as white after playing d5 in this position than they have won. So it's not that Kurnosov at this point has been drawing from an invisible portable smartphone to derive his moves from Fritz or Ribka. It's that you know, the white player himself is making moves that definitely aren't as good as other options that white has. So I found that very interesting. So anyway, play continues now, knight to e5, and from here now white swings the bishop down to h6, attacking the bishop on g7. And here Kurnosov said in his annotations that he thought of moving the rook to f7, but he didn't like the fact that after white plays rook to h5, the knight is attacked with tempo. And how that would look would be something like this. So rook to f7, the bishop can take, and once the rook recaptures, the white rook comes crashing down into h5, attacking the knight, and also posing some risks of, say, for example, rook over to g5 supported by the queen. So, like, I mean, there's a lot of things going on in this position that wouldn't be favorable for black. So Kurnosov was pretty much dead on the money with that analysis. So let's go back now to bishop to h6. So instead of playing rook to f7, Kurnosov decided to play the knight now to c4, attacking the queen. From here, play continued, queen now to g5, and Kurnosov now played rook to f7 to prevent the mate threat. And from here now, bishop takes on c4. Now I want to flip back a move here. Kurnosov also annotated this part of the game, and he says, after thinking over his previous move for 40 minutes, my opponent now offered me a draw. However, I considered that I had a serious advantage and saw no grounds for taking a draw. Now that's what Igor Kurnosov said. The thing is, though, is that I think he was being a little bit more favorable to his position than what was realistic at the time, because the position really isn't that favorable for black right now. White has a lot of strong threats going on, as does black, and the position in general is relatively equal in terms of computer engine analysis. That being said, once again, the database results do tend to favor black, so he probably was looking quite deep into things and thought that he stood better. But nonetheless, his opponent took 40 minutes to think about his next move, and then offered a draw. Now, if you're going to sit there for 40 minutes and ponder a position, your opponent probably isn't going to sit there and wait for you at the table, staring blindly at the chessboard waiting for you to move. So once again, this is another illustration of when it's appropriate, or it doesn't even matter when it's appropriate, but when players will get up and they'll walk around the chess hall, or go outside like Kurnosov did. Now, I did mention earlier in the video that he went out for some cigarettes, but I should also clarify that when he was out there were other people out there with him as well, other people that were participating in the tournament, and even in some cases some arbiters. So it wasn't like he was isolated by himself outside, drawing moves from some kind of some kind of setup that he had. So anyway, I thought that was interesting. But as we're going to see as the game unfolds here, White again makes some crucial mistakes in the position, and the question that you'll have to answer, and I'll lend my opinion to when we're done, is if the counter moves played by Kurnosov were logical looking moves in the position, or were they really something that only a computer could have came up with. So let's get back to the game here. So after bishop takes on c4, Kurnosov replies, knight captures on c4. And from here, the rook was brought down now to d4, attacking the knight and the pawn. And Kurnosov came up with the move queen to d6. And I think it's worthwhile to take a moment and look at this move, because this is one of the moves where some people have said, could he have came up with this move on his own in the position? Well, queen to d6 by itself is doing a lot of things for black. First of all, if the rook captures the knight here on c4, the queen can come over and take the bishop on h6. So there isn't really much of a threat here by capturing the knight. Also, queen to d6 gives the queen access to this dark square diagonal, which has a nice pathway into the enemy king, and could be utilized later on from black. But finally, the bishop here on c8 is liberated. Now the bishop can come out and support this square here on f5, and there's a lot of possibilities for black, and white still has some options to defend against all of this. But queen d6, it's a fine move, and I really don't see this being a difficult move for a grandmaster to come up with in this position. Now the kicker is that it wasn't the best move in the position that black had at its disposal. So if we move back a move here, the best move for black in this position would have been for the knight to take on b2. And the computer had absolutely no problem spotting this. So it begs the question that if Kurnosov was actually cheating, why wouldn't he have played the best move in the position? Now it would have looked something like this. The knight would have come in and taken, and instead of capturing the knight, which we'll look at in a second, the rook will take the pawn. That's what the computer figured out to be the best move in the position. From here now the knight can land the check, and when the king goes to d2, here goes this light square bishop that we were talking about, firmly supported by the rook and in a very powerful position. And from this position, play could continue. King captures on d3. Black can bring up the pawn now to e6, opening up the diagonal access to the queens. And when the queens come off the board and the bishop falls on g7, black has the very nice move capturing on d5. And the resulting line that follows is just crushing for white. So a totally lost position. Now I'm going to go back to knight takes on b2, and the reason why the king doesn't capture looks something like this. If the king takes, black has the nice move pawn to c5 attacking the rook, and when the rook takes the pawn, queen lands a check, and once the king moves, there goes the bishop on h6. So once again, it's another crushing line for black. So I found that very interesting that instead of queen to d6, the best move was knight to b2. Now Kurnosov himself said in his annotations that he made public is that it seemed to me as though the move queen to d6 gave me serious initiative. It turns out that instead b2 led to a decisive advantage. But I did not consider this move. Just think how much I would be to blame if I had analyzed this position at home. So basically, he didn't play the best move in the position according to what the engines thought was the best move. So let's continue on here. He played queen to d6, and we already talked about some of the benefits from that and why it's not really a difficult move for a grandmaster to see. Play continued now. Bishop captures on g7, rook recaptures, and from here now, white captures the pawn on h5. Play continues now. Queen up to f4, delivering a check. And I think you would agree that there is a lot of options at black's disposal here, because once the king moves, all of a sudden now we've got this light square bishop that's going to come out and play a major role in black's position. So, you know, you could take a look at the position, pause the video if you want to, but things are not looking very good for white. That being said, it's not hopelessly lost, but it's definitely not favorable, and white is behind in positional strength and in material. So from here, once the king moves to b1, here comes the bishop now to f5, a perfect square for it to be at this particular point in time, because you'll see here that the enemy king is on that nice light square diagonal, and black can make use of that. So to counter that, white captures the pawn now on e4, and now the bishop attacks the queen on g4. So basically, white has to do something about this. Now in the game, Kurnosov's opponent played knight to e2, and this was an immediately losing move because this invites queen now to d2, and black is just in a much stronger position. And in fact, Kurnosov's opponent resigned in this position in an unprofessional manner, like we talked about. He got up from the table, didn't even shake his opponent's hand, and went straight to the arbiter. Now, if play would have continued and a resignation wouldn't have taken place, it would have looked something like this. The rook would have to take the queen on d2 because mate is being threatened. Once the knight recaptures the rook with check and the king moves to c1, the queen falls now on h5, and when the rook recaptures, the knight moves off to safety on c4, and black just has a crushing position. But if we go back to the move just before knight to e2, white missed again a better move for white in this position, which would have been simply queen to h6. Now in terms of positional strength, it's just over a pawn worth of material in black's favor, but you know, it's definitely much better than what was played by placing the knight onto e2. So, you know, my conclusion is this. I think that Mamedyarov needs to come out and make a public apology. Since this whole fiasco has started, he has published another comment on Kurnosov's other games played in the tournament, trying to once again bring into question his integrity in terms of whether Kurnosov was using computer assistance. But as this game clearly shows, you know, with the lack of evidence, you know, once again, the only thing that was found on Kurnosov's person was a pen, some paper, and some cigarettes. So, you know, to me, it's just a very unfortunate event that took place, and I think that the only way it can be rectified is to have Mamedyarov come out with a public apology and have everybody just move on. And I'm not sure if that's going to happen, but that's my position on the issue, and I'm looking forward to hear what you think as well. And I'm also really curious to hear your feedback on what you felt took place in the game, and how you looked upon white's decisions and black's decisions as the game progressed. So take care, hope you enjoy the video, and we'll see you next time.